So I wanted to give a quick recap over the weekend's fights. But in particular, for this video, is going to be the card that took place on HBO. Lomachenko versus Jason Sosa, Alexander Usyk versus Michael Hunter, and Alexander Vazdik versus Yuneski Gonzalez. I'll start with the main event, Lomachenko versus Jason Sosa. And in spite of the fact early on that it seemed like Lomachenko was having a few issues with Jason Sosa, in particular just the fact that Sosa wasn't necessarily falling for every little thing that Lomachenko was able to do, and he was able to land the overhand right. Not especially frequently, but frequently enough, I think, to give Lomachenko at the very least a little bit of pause in terms of his own attack, and not necessarily go as all out in the early rounds as he can sometimes otherwise do in terms of just switching it up between all of the kind of sporadic movement that he gives, erratic movement actually, that he gives to his opponents, and then he follows up with a pretty good offensive onslaught when he's not doing that. Took him a few rounds to finally get into a rhythm. I'd say by about the fourth round is when Lomachenko pretty much got into his rhythm in terms of just making it smooth sailing from that point onwards. Eventually, he was able to just stop Jason Sosa. Sosa refused to come out for the ninth round. He basically quit on a stool. At that point, in the eighth round, he was getting shellacked pretty much. He was getting smacked around, beat up, and what have you. Beat up, especially to the body. It seemed like the Lomachenko's body work paid more dividends, more so than his headshots. I mean, the headshots were pretty solid, but the body work is what I think made the big difference in terms of truly wearing Jason Sosa down and, taking his confidence away. This was a fight I think that was fairly easy for most people to call. I didn't necessarily really think Sosa provided an especially high amount of danger, especially considering just his overall style. He's a little bit too basic and way too slow compared to Lomachenko. He did provide a good amount of kind of head and torso movement early on, and he was able to hide that right hand pretty nicely and landed quite a few times, and give Lomachenko some pause in the early rounds at the very least. But eventually, it just wasn't meant to be. He didn't necessarily have enough of a change-up or a variation in his overall attack and movement in order to give Lomachenko enough pause. And once Vasyl managed to get into his rhythm, Sosa wasn't really able to get him out of it. One thing I got to mention, though, is all this stuff about Vasyl Lomachenko being pound for pound, especially pound for pound number one, or even really top five, frankly. I think is extremely premature. This is a guy who he fought some of the better names at 126, but most of the top guys at 126, outside of Gary Russell Jr., he never even fought. Not to mention the fact that at 130 he hasn't fought any of the top fighters. He fought Raul Martinez, who was by far the weakest champion, and then he fought another guy who was basically by far the weakest title holder in Jason Sosa. Not to mention the Nicholas Walters win, which I think is quite a bit overrated just because of Nicholas Walters' name value. But Walters had never actually done anything at 130 pounds. He'd never achieved a damn thing at 130 pounds, and still his biggest win, generally speaking, was against Nonito Donaire, who himself was a guy that came up all the way from flyweight, flyweight, super flyweight. And yeah, he was a weight bully at those weight classes, but at the same time, this is a guy that's more of a natural bantamweight or super bantamweight, fighting Walters at featherweight. And honestly speaking, realistically speaking, Walters should have won that fight, and he actually probably should have won that fight more conclusively and without as much drama as he faced, considering the fact that he was rocked pretty badly in that fight. But I mean, this isn't necessarily a video entirely looking to shoot down Lomachenko's pound-for-pound prospects, but I do think that needs to be said, just because of the fact that he hasn't proven anywhere near as much as not only some of the other guys that get talked up for pound as of right now. He hasn't proven as much as your Chocolatitos, as your Wards, as your Kovalevs, as your Golovkins, Jacobs. He's basically at a point where he could potentially get there in the future, but he really doesn't have the backing behind him in terms of who he's beaten, and also I guess who those guys could potentially be beating at the moment as well. And also just the fact that he hasn't necessarily fought the absolute best of the best at 126 and 130 yet. I mean, a lot of people I think are just kind of ranking him off of this supposed eye test, and yet he still has that loss to Orlando Salido, and he hasn't necessarily proven that same eye test ability against the elite fighters like Salido and beyond. Salido and up. He hasn't fought of a Jezreel Corrales and wiped them out in the same fashion as Jason Sosa or Ron Martinez. He hasn't fought a Miguel Burchelt and wiped him out in the same fashion as the Jason Sosa or Ron Martinez. So until that type of thing occurs, I think all the people that are ranking him top 1, top 3, top 5 pound for pound are fucking fooling themselves. Period. Point blank. But beyond that, I want to get to the other fights. I'll get to Alexander Usyk versus Michael Hunter next. Usyk managed to defend his WBO cruiserweight title against Hunter. Hunter actually gave Usyk a fair bit of trouble early on as well. Kind of similar to Sosa and Lomachenko, albeit without Hunter completely falling apart later on. And Hunter did a pretty good job of kind of varying up his overall offense and his defense. Provided a fair bit of movement, and he was doing a good job of kind of varying up both the speed and the velocity and just the power of his shots against Usyk. So it's not like Usyk could very easily predict exactly where Hunter was going to come from with what type of punches, power, and speed-wise he was going to be throwing at him. So basically, I scored this fight 7 rounds to 5 for Usyk, and then of course he managed to drop Hunter in the last round. So it was 115 to 112 on my card by the end of it. And Usyk, in spite of the fact that Hunter did make him look a bit on the average side at times, and made him make quite a few different mistakes as a whole. I do think that Hunter, generally speaking, was being kind of underrated going into this fight. I think largely because of, as I mentioned in the recent video, nobody ever heard of him, so he must not be any good. But I was fairly well-versed in his background. I knew that he was a really solid amateur, managed to defeat Dominic Breazeale. I think it was 2 out of 3 times or 3 out of 4 times. Can't remember which in particular off the top of my head. But this is a guy that, is a good boxer and a fairly solid puncher as well. A guy that was able to float between heavyweight and super heavyweight as an amateur. And so, he carries a nice bit of pop in the cruiserweight division as a pro. And that's even not necessarily being the biggest cruiserweight of all. He actually lost a pound between the weigh-in and the fight when it came to his fight night weight, according to HBO, as opposed to Usyk, who gained about 10 pounds. But, that's besides the fact. Usyk managed to successfully defeat Hunter. And honestly, I think in the general sense of things, that kind of just shows Usyk's level of quality in terms of the fact that he was able to defeat a fellow undefeated fighter, a guy that was kind of on his way up. And I wouldn't necessarily count out Hunter in terms of the title race sometime in the future, especially if Usyk was to move up out of the cruiserweight division and on up to heavyweight. I think Hunter is fairly capable of beating most of the other titleists at cruiserweight. Maybe accepting like Brady's, but against any of the other guys, I'd say he's about a 50-50 or at the very least a very live underdog against them. Usyk, with regards to his prospects as a potential heavyweight, though, I don't particularly like him. I think that he doesn't really sit down on his punches enough. I don't think he really hits hard enough. And as much as he tries to look cute in there with all the foot movement and, the side to side and all that stuff and the sidestepping and everything, I don't think that he's that good at it. I mean, I don't think that he's a Lomachenko at it. I don't think that he's a Gvozdyk at it. I think that a lot of that stuff will get him into trouble, considering the fact that he does kind of leave his head fairly well open while he's doing that. And against some of these other heavyweights, the taller guys, he's going to have to, try and get on the inside in order to actually make his punches count. And I just can't see him doing that at the very top level. Not even necessarily at the very top level, but even against some of the top 10 guys. I mean, forget the likes of a Joshua or a Wilder. I think even the likes of Andrew Ruiz or a Joseph Parker, if they clip Usyk, it's going to be, it's going to be a very bad night for him. So that's where I stand on Usyk. He's a damn good cruiserweight, but I don't really like his prospects as a heavyweight. Alexander Gvozdyk against Yaneski Gonzalez. Gvozdyk, to me, of the 3 fighters from the Ukraine on this card, is the most impressive overall. I think he has the most professional style. I think he utilizes his movement extremely well. He's able to integrate it back into his offense extremely well. It's like he's not wasting movement just to look flashy or to just draw his opponents into doing something completely stupid. He's basically utilizing it in a manner that's defensively sound while being offensively sound as well. He's integrating it and flowing right into his offense from his defense in a pretty smooth fashion, and he's busting you up in the midst of doing that. And that's pretty much what he did to Yanetsky Gonzalez. Gonzalez was just too slow for him, too slow of hand, too slow of foot. Gvozdyk was too quick, too powerful, too sharp, too much of everything basically against Gonzalez. And it was a pretty impressive win considering that Gonzalez basically ran Pascal on the brink and really deserved to beat Pascal. Not to mention the fact that he ran Shabransky pretty close, came close to defeating him, as well as the fact that Gvozdyk does have that recent victory over Isaac Chilembo, which was really a more impressive victory than what Sergey Kovalev had over the same fighter. In spite of the fact that he did look a bit iffy against Tommy Karpency, he wound up getting dropped in the first round. He did manage to come back and take Karpency out. And Gvozdyk, to me, is looking like probably one of the brightest prospects at light heavyweight, if not the brightest. He's a guy that I could very well see against any of the top names next fight, matter of fact. Not even in the next year, within the next fight, really. I'd give him a solid chance against Ward, against Kovalev, against Stevenson, against anybody. I think probably, incidentally, the most dangerous opponents for him would be either the likes of an Adonis Stevenson or Arthur Beterbiev, simply because of the amount of knockout, lights-out power that they have, as well as the fact that Gvozdyk might somewhat still be a bit shinny. I'm not sure if that Karpency thing was just a fluke and him just getting caught about as clean as you can get, or if that may portend a potential weakness in his overall ability. Not necessarily having the best chin. But, he has a fairly solid defense in order to make up for that, if that is the case. So I still think fairly highly of the fighter. But that's going to be pretty much it for my recap of the top-ranked HBO Ukrainian fighter card. And I will catch you guys on the next one. Peace.